Billionaire arrives home early, and poor cleaner reveals a secret that changes everything. The bouquet was ridiculous. That was the first thought Callaway Rice had when the florist handed it to him at O'Hare. 40 long-stemmed red roses, threaded through with white lilies and dark green eucalyptus, wrapped in craft paper and tied with a satin ribbon the color of champagne. It cost $420. He didn't flinch. He hadn't flinched at a price tag in 11 years. His assistant Priya had suggested ordering ahead. He'd refused. There was something he liked about the idea of carrying them himself through the terminal, like a regular man with regular plans on a regular Tuesday afternoon in Chicago. He wasn't a regular man, and he knew it. But today felt different. Today, he decided to stop pretending that a penthouse in River North and a net worth printed in the pages of Forbes was the same thing as a life. He'd been in Dubai for 9 days, closing the Meridian Tower deal. 9 days in a city of polished glass and curated ambition, where every lobby smelled like imported cedar and every conversation had an agenda buried inside it like a splinter. He'd negotiated a $200 million development partnership on 4 hours of sleep, eaten room service steak at midnight, and video called his mother in Evanston for 12 minutes on Sunday, long enough for her to tell him he looked tired and too thin, and for him to say he was fine, everything was fine. But somewhere between the 83rd floor boardroom and a dinner at Nobu, he ate alone, staring at the Dubai skyline that never went dark. Something had shifted inside him, quiet at first, then insistent, the kind of feeling that arrives without knocking and refuses to leave until you deal with it. He'd made a decision. When he landed, he would ask Selena Voss to marry him. Not at a restaurant, not with a photographer hiding behind a potted plant or a flash mob of friends on a bridge somewhere. At home. In the living room they'd spent 4 years arguing about how to furnish, finally settling on a style Selena called quiet luxury and Callaway privately called expensive beige. There was something right about proposing inside an argument they'd already won together. He had the ring in his jacket pocket. He'd had it for 3 months, a custom piece from a jeweler on Michigan Avenue, emerald-cut diamond, platinum band, a small channel of sapphires along the side because Selena had mentioned once, one single time, at a museum gift shop in Boston, that sapphires were her favorite stone. He had remembered. That was one of the things he was good at, remembering things people said only once because they didn't think anyone was really listening. The flight was early. Weather tailwind, the captain announced cheerfully, like it was a gift from God. Callaway texted Selena from the plane, back early. Surprise, no response, but she was bad with her phone. Always had been. He'd learned not to read into the silence. She was a gallery curator. Her attention lived in rooms, not screens. The black car dropped him at the building on East Erie Street at 2:17 p.m. The doorman, Hector, looked startled, then recovered fast with the practiced composure of a man who'd worked the lobby of a luxury high-rise for 15 years. "Mr. Reese, didn't know you were back." "Neither did I." Callaway smiled and handed him a folded bill. "Don't bother calling up." The elevator smelled like the cedar oil they used on the hardwood floors. 42 floors. He watched the numbers climb and tried to rehearse what he would say. He never rehearsed anything. Improvisation had made him a billionaire, or so the profile in Chicago magazine had claimed, in a piece that ran with a photo he hated and a headline he liked. But now, with roses pressed against his chest and the ring pressing against his ribs like a stone, he couldn't hold on to a single sentence. "I want to build something with you that isn't just a business. I've been carrying this ring since March. And I'm done waiting for the right moment because I don't think the right moment comes. I think you have to make it. You are the only person who has ever made this city feel like somewhere I actually live, and not somewhere I'm just passing through on the way to the next deal." He exhaled. Floor 38, 39, 40. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, a wide marble hall with 14-foot ceilings and a grand staircase that Selina had insisted on re-carpeting twice before settling on the current ivory runner. Afternoon light poured through the west-facing floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the crystal drops of the entryway chandelier and scattering them across the marble in small, quiet explosions of color. The chandelier itself was off. The room had a cool, still quality. Like a breath being held, the first thing he noticed was the smell. Lemon cleaning solution, sharp and clean beneath the room's usual scent of expensive candles and cut flowers. Good. Zinnia had been in today. The second thing he noticed was the music. Faint, floating in from somewhere deeper in the apartment. Not Selina's kind. None of her meticulously curated Spotify playlists built for productive mornings or wine and conversation. This was something else entirely, soulful and low. A piano doing something patient and complicated, and a woman's voice working over a melody the way a hand works over worn wood, finding every groove, making the age of it mean something. It sounded like grief dressed up in its Sunday best. The third thing he noticed was Zinnia Vale. She stepped out of the hallway leading to the kitchen with a mop in one hand and a cleaning cloth draped over her forearm like a sommelier's towel. She wore her blue uniform dress and white apron, her dark natural hair pulled back under a small clip at the nape of her neck. She had one earbud in. The music was coming from a phone clipped to her apron pocket. She moved with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned to work quietly in large spaces, making herself invisible inside rooms built to make people feel grand. She saw him and went completely still. For a suspended moment, they simply looked at each other. He'd employed Zinnia Vale for 16 months, and they had spoken in total perhaps 40 conversations, most of them short, most of them practical. She cleaned Tuesdays and Fridays. She was always done before he got home. The building manager, Trish Okafor, handled the scheduling. Calloway left an envelope with her monthly payment on the kitchen island, and that was the full extent of their relationship. He knew her name, and the soft sound of her footsteps above his home office, and that she left the throw pillows arranged in a way that was slightly different from Selina's, a particular unconscious precision he had noticed once, without meaning to, and never forgotten. She pulled out the earbud. "Mr. Rice, I didn't expect, neither did I." He held up the roses, faintly embarrassed, as if the flowers needed explaining. "Is Selina upstairs?" Something crossed Zinnia Vale's face. Not quite alarm, subtler than that, and more complicated. The kind of expression that moves through a person when they are running a rapid and unwilling calculation, adding up numbers whose total they already know and hate. Yes, she's... He was already stepping toward the staircase. "Mr. Rice." Something in her voice stopped him. Not the words. People said his name that way 100 times a day, deferential, eager, strategic, afraid. It was the specific quality beneath them. Careful, controlled in a way that suggested the control was costing her something real. He turned back. Zinnia Vale set the mop against the wall. She took 2 steps toward him and stopped, hands clasped in front of her apron, her dark eyes holding his with a steadiness that did not match the tension visible in her jaw. She was 26 years old. He knew that from the HR file he'd glanced at once, months ago. She looked older than that right now. She looked like someone who had completed a long and private education in how to be present inside a painful truth without breaking from it. "Don't," she said quietly. "Please. You don't want to see what's up there." The foyer went very still. He stared at her. He had built his fortune on the ability to read people, not just what they said, but the shape of what they didn't say. He knew how to distinguish a lie from a truth. He knew how to recognize a truth someone desperately wished was a lie. Zinnia Vale was doing the last of those things. The roses in his hand felt suddenly absurdly heavy. "How long have you known?" he asked. His voice came out level. He was grateful for that, at least. She didn't answer. The steadiness of her gaze, the quality of someone who had already made their private peace with something terrible before being asked to speak it aloud, told him everything the silence didn't. From upstairs, there was a sound, soft, footsteps crossing hardwood in the master bedroom. A pause. Then the quiet, careful, unmistakable click of a door being eased shut from the inside. The sound of someone who had heard the elevator arrive and was now rearranging a story before anyone could read it. Calloway Rice stood in the marble foyer of his 42-floor penthouse, holding $420 worth of roses and a ring he'd been carrying since March, and listened to a door close in a life he had been about to ask to be permanent. He looked at Zinnia. She looked back at him, and he could see it there. Not pity. Something kinder than pity and harder than sympathy. The particular expression of a person who will stand with you inside a terrible moment because leaving feels wrong and staying is the only decent thing left to do. Neither of them moved. And then, from the top of the grand staircase, the ivory runner catching the pale afternoon light, the slow and deliberate sound of a second set of footsteps began, carefully, to descend. The footsteps on the staircase were slow, deliberate. The footsteps of someone who had decided in the 30 seconds since hearing the elevator arrive to come downstairs wearing a particular expression, and needed the time to put it on correctly. Calloway did not move. He stood in the foyer with the roses at his side and watched the staircase the way he watched people across negotiating tables, patiently, without blinking, giving nothing away. Zinnia Vale stood 6 feet to his left and also did not move, and he was aware of her presence in his periphery, the way you become aware of still water. It was simply there, and it was steady, and in some inexplicable way, that steadiness was the only thing keeping the floor of the moment from giving way entirely. Selina Voss appeared at the top of the staircase in a silk robe, ivory, the kind that photographed beautifully. Her auburn hair was loose. She looked at him for one fraction of a second before her expression reorganized itself into something that resembled pleasant surprise. Cal. His name in her voice. The way she used to say it on the phone when he traveled, warm and easy and like coming home. "You didn't say you were coming back today." "I texted you," he said. "My phone was on silent." A small, practiced laugh. "You know how I am." He did. He had always known how she was. From behind her, from the hallway at the top of the stairs that led to the guest suite, came the unmistakable sound of the back service door clicking closed. The exit that led to the secondary stairwell. The exit the housekeeper used when the freight elevator was occupied. The exit that most guests of the penthouse didn't know existed. Selina kept smiling. Calloway kept watching her. The roses hung at his side. He became aware, distantly, that his knuckles had gone tight around the stems, tight enough that the small thorns the florist had failed to strip from one of the lower stems were pressing, minutely, into his palm. He did not loosen his grip. "Who just went out the service door?" he said. Not a question. He had practiced being precise his whole life, and precision was its own kind of mercy sometimes. It shortened the distance between the first lie and the last one. Selina's expression did not collapse. It shifted. There was a version of this moment he had imagined, in the dim, back corridor part of his mind, where the thoughts he refused to examine lived, in which she cried, or confessed, or said something that cracked the carefully constructed architecture of the last 4 years open so they could walk through the rubble together. He had never let himself look at that imagined scene long enough to know what he did next. He'd assumed he'd never have to. She lifted her chin slightly and said, "This isn't what you think." "Tell me what it is, then." She said a name. He recognized it, a name attached to a face he'd seen twice at gallery openings, a man who consulted for institutions, who had an apartment in Lincoln Park and a reputation for being interesting at dinner parties. The name landed in the foyer and lay there between them like something dropped from a great height. Below him, he realized later he had not consciously noticed it happening, Zinnia Vale had quietly retreated toward the kitchen hallway, not fleeing, giving him room. He was aware of it the way you are aware of the tide going out, a pulling back of something warm, and then you are standing alone on the stone. Selina was still talking. Her voice was calm and measured, and she was explaining, with the fluency of someone who had practiced this explanation, or something like it, many times. She said things like distance and disconnected and never really honest with each other. She said his name softly, like a kind of punctuation, at the end of sentences that were trying to be something other than what they were. He listened. He let her finish. He was very good at listening. Then he set the roses down on the marble entry table, carefully, not thrown, not dropped, but placed with a deliberate gentleness that felt like the only thing in the moment he actually controlled, and he said, "You should go." She blinked. "Cal, today, take what you need and go to wherever you need to go." He looked at her for a long moment. He wanted to feel something violent, rage or devastation, or even the clean surgical pain of genuine surprise. Instead, what he felt was the particular exhaustion of a man who has been holding something very heavy for a long time and has finally simply set it down. "I'll have Priya arrange the rest." Calloway, Selina, just her name, the same way she'd said his, and somehow that was enough. She went upstairs. She came back down 20 minutes later with a bag and her coat. She paused in the foyer and looked at him where he stood at the window with his back to the room, looking out over the grey November spread of the city, Lake Michigan flat and pewter in the distance. She said something. He didn't turn around. He heard the elevator open and close, and then he was alone in the penthouse except for the sound, faint, from the direction of the kitchen, of water running and the quiet resumption of that piano music. Distant and low, he stood at the window for a long time. He wasn't sure how long enough for the light to shift, long enough for the sky over the lake to go from pewter to a deep, bruised violet at the edges. He was still in his suit jacket. The ring was still in his pocket. At some point, he reached in and held it in his closed fist, and then he put it back. "Mr. Rice." He turned. Zinnia Vale stood in the kitchen doorway. She'd taken off the apron. She held 2 mugs of coffee, plain, no tray, no ceremony, and her expression was entirely uncomplicated, steady and direct, and offering something she clearly was not sure would be accepted. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said, and she crossed the room and set a mug on the table beside him. She did not leave, but she also did not stay close. She settled into the chair at the far end of the sectional, the one nobody ever sat in because it faced the wrong direction, and wrapped her hands around her own mug and looked out at the same sky he'd been looking at. He sat down on the couch. He didn't touch the coffee for a while. "How long?" he said again, but gently this time, without the edge. 3 weeks, she said. "The second Friday. I came up the service stairs because the freight elevator was occupied, and the door was open. I didn't know. I'm sorry." He nodded. He looked at the window. "You should have told me." "I know," she said. "I thought about it every day." A pause. "But it wasn't my place." He almost said something sharp about that, about what her place was, and then he stopped, because it occurred to him that she was right, and that what she had just described was, in its way, an act of considerable restraint and considerable kindness. She had carried something that was not hers to carry for 3 weeks in someone else's house, alone. "What's your name?" he said. He knew her name. He meant something different. She looked at him. Zinnia Vale. "How long have you been doing this work?" 4 years, a beat, in Chicago. 2 before that in Atlanta. "You're from Atlanta?" "Born and raised." Something passed through her expression, brief, layered, hard to name. "Came up here after my mother got sick. Better access to a specialist at Northwestern." He nodded. He looked at the coffee. He finally picked it up. It was hot and strong, and she hadn't asked him how he took it. She'd made it black, which was correct, which meant she had noticed at some point without being asked, the way careful people notice things they are never thanked for noticing. "Is she—" he started. "She passed," Zinnia said quietly, "in August." "I'm sorry," he said. He meant it. They sat in the settling quiet of the penthouse as the sky went fully dark outside, and the lights of Chicago came up below them. Thousands of them, indifferent and gorgeous, doing what they always did regardless of what happened in the rooms of the people looking down at them. He noticed then what he hadn't noticed before. Partially tucked beneath the far cushion of the chair she was sitting in, not hidden exactly, just displaced, was the corner of a notebook. A sketchbook, by the look of the binding, thick paper edges, a pencil tucked in the spiral. Something about the way her arm shifted slightly when his eyes moved there, a tiny, involuntary protective adjustment, made him pause. "What is that?" he said. "Nothing." Fast. Too fast. "Zinnia." She looked at him. He looked at the notebook. The moment stretched between them. 2 strangers sitting in the wreckage of someone else's decision, navigating a kind of unexpected intimacy neither of them had asked for or prepared for. Slowly, with the particular reluctance of a person revealing something they have never shown to anyone, she reached under the cushion and set the sketchbook on the table between them. He leaned forward and opened it. The first page stopped him cold, then the second, then the third. He kept turning, slower and slower, with the feeling of someone who has opened a door expecting a closet, and found instead a room he had no map for. The drawings were architectural, precise, ambitious, breathtaking in their detail. Floor plans and elevations and structural section cuts and perspective renderings, all done in pencil on graph-lined paper with a skill and a confidence that did not belong in a sketchbook shoved under a cushion in someone else's penthouse. Residential towers, mixed-use developments, a community library that used its roof as a public park, a mid-rise housing complex with a central atrium that looked like it had been designed to hold light the way a cupped hand holds water. He looked up at her. She was watching him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before, vulnerable, braced, already half prepared for something dismissive. "Where did you study?" he said. The question landed between them, and the silence that followed it was the loudest thing in the room. Zinnia Vale looked at the window, then back at him. "I didn't," she said. The sketchbook sat open on the table between them, and Calloway Rice did not look away from it. He turned another page. A mixed-use development. Retail base, residential tower above, a covered arcade running along the street-level facade that used angled glass to pull natural light down into what would otherwise be a dead zone between buildings. The detail was extraordinary. She had drawn the sun angles. She had drawn the shadow patterns at 3 different times of day. In the margin, in small, precise handwriting, she had noted the material specifications: reclaimed brick, thermally broken aluminum framing, green roof on the 3rd-floor setback. He had sat across the table from licensed architects who didn't think like this. "You didn't study," he said again, "not a challenge." He was trying to understand the shape of what he was looking at. Not formally. Zinnia sat very still across from him, her coffee mug held in both hands, her eyes on the open sketchbook with the expression of someone watching a private thing be handled by someone else. "I took every online course I could find, MIT OpenCourseware, Coursera, some programs through the Chicago Architecture Center. I used the public library for the reference books. I've been doing it since I was 17. 17, he repeated. "My father used to take me to building sites on Saturdays," she said. "He did finish carpentry, commercial and residential. He'd walk me through the bones of a place while it was still being built, before the walls went up, before everything got covered over, and explain how it worked, how the load moved, how the light would come in once the windows were in, how a building breathes." She paused. "He said if you understood how a building breathed, you understood how it would feel to live inside it." Calloway was quiet. Outside, Chicago was fully dark now, brilliant and indifferent beyond the glass. "What happened to him?" he asked. "He died when I was 19. Simple, contained, a fact she had been carrying long enough that she could hold it without visibly straining. "After that I had to work. My mother needed help, and the scholarship I'd been offered it didn't cover everything, and I couldn't leave her, so I deferred. And then I deferred again, and then it expired, and that was that." "What scholarship?" A pause. "Illinois Institute of Technology," she said. "Full ride, architecture program." The room went very quiet. Calloway closed the sketchbook slowly, with care, and slid it back across the table toward her. Then he leaned back in the couch and looked at the ceiling for a moment, at the plaster medallion from which the chandelier hung, the one Selina had found at an architectural salvage company in Wicker Park, and had installed by a restoration specialist at considerable expense. He had never looked at it closely before. It was, he noticed now, genuinely beautiful. Acanthus leaves and running vines, the kind of detail that required someone to care very much about something that most people would never notice. "Why are you cleaning apartments?" he said. It came out blunter than he intended, and he heard it, and he didn't take it back, because she deserved the honest version of the question. She didn't flinch. "Because it pays. Because I can set my own schedule. Because I needed to be at my mother's hospital 3 afternoons a week, and this was the only work that let me do that." She looked at him steadily. "It's not a failure, Mr. Rice. It's just what the situation required." "I know," he said. "I didn't mean it as... I know what you meant. Not harsh, just clear. People always assume the story is about shame. It isn't. It's just the story." He looked at her. She looked back at him. There was something in the directness of it, the complete absence of performance, the refusal to make herself smaller or more palatable for the sake of his comfort, that struck him somewhere behind the sternum. He had sat across from senators and CEOs, and none of them had looked at him the way Zinnia Vale was looking at him right now, like she saw him without any particular agenda about what she found. "Show me the rest of the sketchbook," he said. "Mr. Rice, Calloway," he said it before he'd decided to. "If we're going to sit here at 9 o'clock on the worst Tuesday of my adult life and drink coffee and talk about architecture, I think you can call me Calloway." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening at the edges of it. "I don't think that's appropriate." "Probably not," he agreed. He picked up his coffee. "Show me the rest of the sketchbook." She did. He asked her at some point past 10 o'clock if she was hungry. She said she should be going. He said the kitchen was full because he'd had Priya schedule a grocery delivery for his return, and that it seemed wasteful not to eat, and he was asking in the spirit of practicality, not sentiment. She gave him a long look that said she recognized exactly what he was doing, and then she said she could eat. He made omelettes. He was not a spectacular cook, but he was a precise one. He'd learned early that cooking alone required either craft or resignation, and he preferred craft. She sat at the kitchen island, and they talked about the sketchbook, page by page, while the city hummed 42 floors below them. And he asked questions, and she answered them with the focused fluency of someone who has been thinking about a subject for years, without having anyone to think about it with. She told him about tension and compression, about how the best buildings were the ones that looked effortless, and were, in fact, the result of an enormous amount of invisible work. About Jean Gang and Helmut Jahn, and the way the Chicago River changed the logic of the city's entire street grid. About how she thought about the people who would live inside a building before she thought about what the building looked like. That the life inside came first, and the form was just the answer to that question. He listened. He stopped being the man who had come home with roses to propose, and became, for a stretch of hours that felt genuinely strange and genuinely good, just a person sitting in a kitchen, listening to another person explain the thing they knew best in the world. It was almost midnight when she started to gather her things. "The supply closet," he said suddenly. She stopped. "What?" "On the 14th floor. The building supply closet. Trish gave me the code once, in case of... I never used it. But the last time I was down there I noticed..." He stopped. There was something in there, a model, built on one of the utility shelves. I thought it was something the maintenance crew had put together, but it wasn't the maintenance crew, was it? The pause that followed was precisely long enough to confirm everything. "Zinnia." "It's nothing," she said. "It was something I was working on for my own. It doesn't matter. I want to see it. It's the middle of the night. I own the building." She looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was exasperated and wary, and beneath both of those things, something that looked faintly like hope, the cautious, skeptical kind that has been disappointed before and has learned to travel lightly. "Tomorrow," she said, "if you still want to. Tomorrow." He still wanted to. At 10 the next morning, she met him on the 14th floor with her keycard, and they stood in the supply closet under a single overhead fluorescent while he looked at what she had built on the utility shelf between the cleaning supply crates and the folded drop cloths. It was a scale model of the Harrison Street development, his Harrison Street development. The project that had been for 6 months, the quiet catastrophe no one at Rice Properties was saying out loud. A $200 million mixed-use complex on the near west side that had stalled in planning review 3 times, that his lead architect had abandoned for a more lucrative commission in Seattle, that the board had been pressuring him to sell off at a loss before the carrying costs swallowed another quarter's earnings. She had built a redesign of it, in cardboard and balsa wood and architectural vellum, with hand-lettered labels along the base identifying structural elements and material choices on a scale of 1 inch to 10 feet on a shelf in the supply closet of the building she cleaned twice a week. He crouched down to get level with it. He looked at it for a very long time. She had solved the problem. The core problem, the one that had sunk 3 planning review submissions, the ground floor activation issue, the way the building turned its back on the adjacent residential neighborhood like a wall instead of an invitation. She had opened the base, broken the podium into a series of stepped terraces that connected the street level to a mid-block public courtyard, used the courtyard to anchor the mixed-income residential above and the commercial below, and resolved the corner condition with a curved glass element that pulled sightlines in from both directions. It was not just a good solution, It was a better solution than anything his own team had produced in 8 months of paid effort. He stood up slowly. He turned and looked at her. She was leaning against the door frame with her arms crossed, watching him with the careful neutrality of someone who has been here before, who has made something good and has learned to hold very still while the world decides what to do with it. "When did you build this?" he said. "Over about 4 months," she said. "I come in early on Tuesdays sometimes, before the building wakes up. You've been designing a solution to my biggest professional problem in my own building's supply closet for 4 months. "I wasn't designing it for you," she said precisely. "I was designing it for myself, because the problem interested me and I needed somewhere to put the thinking." He looked at the model again. He looked at her. He thought about the Harrison Street board meeting scheduled for Thursday, 3 days away, at which he was expected to present either a credible new direction or a recommendation to divest. "I need to borrow this," he said. Something flickered in her expression. "For what?" "I have a board meeting on Thursday." "Callaway." The name came out before she caught herself. She stopped. He said nothing about it. "That's my work. You can't just—" "I know," he said. "I know it is." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you to give it to me. I'm asking you to trust me with it. There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment, measuring something, weighing something, running a calculation he was not privy to. "3 days, she said finally, "and you tell them where it came from." "Every word," he said. She uncrossed her arms. She looked at the model on the shelf. Then she looked back at him with an expression that was fierce and frightened and luminous all at once, the face of someone standing at the edge of something enormous, deciding whether the ground on the other side will hold. "3 days, she said again, "and you tell them my name." The Rice Properties boardroom occupied the entire northeast corner of the 31st floor of 180 North Wacker Drive, a room engineered, consciously or not, to communicate a single message to everyone who entered it, that the people who sat in these chairs had already won, and that what happened in this room was merely the administrative confirmation of that fact. Callaway arrived at 7:30 Thursday morning, 2 hours before the meeting. He carried the model in a large, flat-lidded presentation box he'd had made overnight at a fabrication shop in Fulton Market. He set it on the credenza behind the head chair and stood looking at it for a while in the early morning light that fell through the north-facing windows, grey and clean, the way Chicago light in November always was. No warmth in it, but a kind of clarity that felt honest. He thought about Zinnia Vale standing in the supply closet doorway with her arms crossed, saying, "You tell them my name." He had not slept especially well. He had lain in the penthouse, stripped now of Selina's things, which had been removed with a quiet efficiency that he suspected cost Selina considerably more composure than she had let him see, and stared at the ceiling and thought about 2 things simultaneously: the model on his nightstand that he'd moved up from the box to look at one more time, and the expression on Zinnia's face when she'd handed it over. The look of someone releasing something they have held very close for a very long time, trusting that the person receiving it will carry it carefully. That look was a kind of contract, and Callaway Rice had never once in his life defaulted on a contract. The board arrived between 8:50 and 9. 7 people. 3 of them had been on the board when his father ran the company. 4 he'd appointed himself. They settled into their chairs with the particular collective energy of people who have been summoned to a potentially unpleasant meeting and have decided to manage their expectations by deciding the unpleasantness in advance. "The Harrison Street situation," said Doreen Mbeki, the board chair, a woman in her 60s with the bearing of a federal judge and the financial instincts of a very patient predator, before Callaway had finished sitting down. "I assume that's why we're here." "It is," said Calloway. "The divestiture proposal has been on the table since August." "It's still on the table," Calloway said. "I want to put something else on the table first." He stood up, moved to the credenza, and lifted the lid off the presentation box. He gave them 40 minutes. He walked them through the model, the redesigned base, the stepped terraces, the mid-block courtyard, the mixed-income residential tower, the curved glass corner element, and what it did to the site's relationship with the surrounding neighborhood. He explained the planning review problems it addressed and how it addressed them. He cited the structural logic, the material strategy, the projected activation of the street-level commercial space, the community benefit case that would support a renewed planning submission. He answered 11 questions, some of them skeptical, some of them sharp, some of them the kind that only get asked when people are genuinely engaged, rather than just performing due diligence. When he finished, Doreen Mbeki sat back in her chair and looked at the model for a long moment. "This is your team's work?" she said. "No," Calloway said. "It belongs to a designer named Zinnia Vale." A pause. "Who is Zinnia Vale?" said Garrett Polk, the youngest board member, a former investment banker, who had the particular habit of asking questions he already knew the answer to. "She cleans my apartment," Calloway said. The room did what rooms do when something unexpected happens in them. It went quiet in a specific way, not the quiet of discomfort, but the quiet of recalibration. 7 people simultaneously revising the story they had been telling themselves about this meeting. "She designed this," Calloway continued, "on her own time, in the supply closet of my building over 4 months, because the problem interested her. She has no formal architectural degree. She was accepted to IIT's architecture program on a full scholarship, which she gave up to care for her mother, who has since passed. She has been teaching herself structural and environmental design since she was 17 years old. And she has solved a problem that cost us 8 months of professional fees and 3 failed planning submissions." Another silence. "You want to bring this to planning review?" Doreen said. "It was not quite a question. I want to bring Zinnia Vale into this room first," Calloway said, "and then I want to bring this to planning review." The vote was unanimous. He called her from the lobby at 11:15. She picked up on the 3rd ring. He could hear in the background the sound of a vacuum cleaner and a television playing somewhere. She was on a job. "It passed," he said. "Unanimous. They want to meet you." The silence that followed was long enough that he checked his phone screen to confirm the call was still connected. "Zinnia." "I heard you," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "I told them everything I said I would tell them." "I know," she said. "I believe you." "I want to offer you a position," he said. "Project design consultant on the Harrison Street development, full salary, benefits, the firm's engineering team as your technical support. And IIT's architecture program has a part-time evening track. I've already spoken with the admissions office. Your scholarship lapsed, but your application record is still on file and your portfolio—" "Calloway." She said his name the way she had in the supply closet, not catching herself this time, just using it, like it had quietly become the right word for him. "Stop!" He stopped. "That's too much," she said. All at once. "That's too much." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to decide all of it right now. I'm asking you to come to the office Monday morning and let me show you the room." Another pause. "What room?" "The one with your name on the door," he said. "I had the sign made this morning. Priya was scandalized. She'll get over it." He heard something that might have been a breath or a laugh or both at once. "You're insufferable," Zinnia Vale said. "Anyone ever tell you that?" "Regularly," he said. "Monday morning, 9 o'clock." She said she'd think about it. She said it in the tone of someone who had already decided and needed the weekend to make peace with what the decision meant. She came, Monday morning, 8:57. She was wearing dark slacks and a cream blouse, and had her hair down for the first time he'd seen, and she stood in the doorway of the small corner office on the 28th floor. Good natural light, sightlines to the river, and looked at the nameplate on the door with an expression that Calloway, watching from a careful distance, had no language for. It moved through several things in rapid succession and then settled into something quiet and private that he felt he should not be looking at directly, the way you don't look directly at someone praying. She was at her desk by 9:15, reviewing the Harrison Street planning files, with a yellow legal pad full of notes by noon. He did not allow himself to think about the way her shoulder had briefly touched his in the elevator going up, or about the small, involuntary catch of her breath when she read her own name on the office door. He did not allow himself to think about what it meant that he had memorized the precise shade of the cream blouse, or that he had arrived at work 40 minutes early for the first time in 6 years to make sure the office was ready. He sat in his own office down the hall and worked, and told himself that what he was feeling was professional satisfaction at a problem elegantly solved. And he believed this right up until Thursday afternoon, when his phone rang, and the name on the screen was not Zinnia's, but his mother's, and Eleanor Rice said his name in the tone she only used when something was already broken, and she was deciding how much of it to show him. "I saw the design," she said. "The Harrison Street redesign. Garrett Polk sent me the board summary." A pause, careful, loaded, the kind of pause that Eleanor Rice deployed the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. "The designer's name is Vale." "That's right," he said. "Zinnia Vale." "Raymond Vale's daughter," his mother said. The name hit him somewhere behind the eyes. He knew that name. He had grown up knowing that name. It appeared in the original company documents, in the founding partnership papers of the firm his father had built into an empire. It appeared once, in a story his father had told once, and then never told again. "Mom," he said slowly, "what do you know about Raymond Vale?" The silence that followed was the longest Eleanor Rice had ever allowed to exist between herself and her son. It was a silence shaped like a decision. The decision about how much truth a person can be handed at once without dropping it. "Calloway," she said finally, her voice stripped of its usual precision, carrying underneath it something old and heavy and long carried. "That girl's father built this family, and you have absolutely no idea what we did to him." Eleanor Rice lived in the same house in Evanston she had lived in for 41 years, a 4-bedroom colonial on a street lined with old oaks that went spectacular in October and skeletal by November, which was what they were now, bare and stark against a grey suburban sky. Calloway had grown up in that house. He had eaten breakfast at that kitchen table every morning for 18 years, had left for college from that front door with a single duffel bag and the specific confidence of a young man who believed that effort and intelligence were sufficient armor against anything the world might do to him. He had been wrong about that in various ways over the years since. But he had never been wrong about it here, on this street, in front of this house, until now. Eleanor answered the door before he knocked. She was 71 years old, elegantly built, with the same dark eyes she had given her son, and a composure that had always seemed less like a personality trait and more like a structural feature. Something load-bearing, without which everything else would shift. She looked this afternoon like a woman whose load-bearing wall had developed a crack she could no longer ignore. "Come inside," she said. "I made coffee." They sat in the living room, not the kitchen, which was where they sat for ordinary conversations. The living room was where Eleanor Rice conducted serious ones. He had been called to this room exactly 3 times in his life: when his father was diagnosed, when the company nearly collapsed in 2009, and when she told him she had found the letters his father wrote but never sent. The ones that explained the choices he had made and refused to explain to anyone living. She had her own coffee cup. She did not touch it. "Raymond Vale," Calloway said. "Tell me." Eleanor set her hands flat on her knees. She looked at the window. She was doing the thing she always did before difficult honesty, organizing it, finding the cleanest possible path through it, the way a woman who has been precise her entire life approaches the one story she has never been able to make precise enough. "Your father and Raymond Vale were partners," she said. "Original partners. Before there was a Rice Properties, there was Vale Rice Development. Raymond was the one who found the Harrison Street site, the original one, back in 1987. A derelict warehouse block. Nobody wanted it. The banks wouldn't touch it. Raymond convinced your father that the near West Side was going to turn. He was right. He was almost always right about land." "I know about the original partnership," Calloway said. "Dad mentioned it once. He said they went separate ways when the company grew." "That's not what happened," Eleanor said. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street. A dog barked somewhere and went quiet. "Raymond had a gift that your father didn't have and could never replicate," she said. "He understood neighborhoods the way other people understand faces, intuitively, immediately, with a kind of empathy that translated directly into vision. He could walk into a blighted block and tell you exactly what it needed and why, and he was right every time. The first 4 projects they did together were Raymond's ideas, Raymond's sites, Raymond's designs in the earliest sense. He wasn't a licensed architect, but he drew everything, conceptually, before any architect touched it. He was the creative engine of that partnership." She paused. She picked up her coffee and set it down without drinking. "And your father," she said, "was very good at raising money, and at managing relationships, and at understanding, eventually, that if he controlled the financing and the legal structure, he controlled the company. Even if he didn't control the ideas." Calloway's jaw tightened. "What did he do?" "He restructured the partnership agreement in 1991, Eleanor said. "When Raymond was in the hospital, his wife had just had a baby, complications. He was out of the office for 6 weeks. Your father brought in new investors and reorganized the corporate structure. Raymond's equity stake went from 40% to 8%. The documents were complicated. The lawyers were your father's lawyers. Raymond trusted him." She looked at her son. Raymond had always trusted him. That was the whole problem. The room was very quiet. "Raymond fought it," she continued, "legally for 2 years. He didn't have the resources your father had. He couldn't sustain it. He took a settlement, a fraction of what the partnership was worth, a fraction of what he was owed, and he walked away. He went back to Atlanta. He did finish carpentry. He died at 53. She paused. "I'm told it was his heart." Calloway stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room and his hands in his pockets, and he looked at the bare oak trees and the grey suburban sky, and he tried to locate inside himself a version of his father that could absorb this information without everything else shifting around it. He couldn't find one. "You knew," he said, "the whole time." "I knew some of it," Eleanor said. "I found out the rest in pieces over the years. Your father never talked about Raymond directly, but I found the correspondence, the original partnership agreements, the restructuring documents." A pause. "I kept them. Why didn't you tell me?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because you loved your father. And because the company you built on top of what he left you, the way you rebuilt it after 2009, the way you run it, I didn't think you needed to know where the first stone came from in order to build something good with what came after." She looked at him. "I was wrong. I should have told you. I'm sorry, Calloway." He turned around. He looked at his mother, at this woman who had been precise and controlled and strategically compassionate his entire life, who was sitting in her living room telling him the truth, with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding it for a very long time. Zinnia's father drew the first designs for the Harrison Street site, he said, not a question. He was putting it together out loud. The original site, yes, Eleanor said. In 1987. It was his concept entirely. Calloway closed his eyes for a moment. Zinnia Vale had spent 4 months in the supply closet of his building, designing a solution to a problem on a site her father had found and conceived 37 years ago. Before she was born, before she existed, drawn by some current of instinct and talent she had inherited from a man she'd lost at 19 and never stopped carrying. He opened his eyes. "I need to go to her," he said. He drove himself. No car service. No driver. He had Zinnia's address from her employee file, an apartment building in Pilsen, the near southwest side, a neighborhood of murals and 2 flats and Mexican bakeries and working artists and families who had lived on the same block for 3 generations. He parked on the street and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the building, a tidy brick 3-flat with a small front garden gone dormant for the winter, a string of porch lights still up from Halloween. And he thought about what he was going to say. He had nothing. He had the truth, which was not the same thing as knowing how to give it to someone. He rang the bell. A long pause. Then her voice through the intercom, cautious. "Who is it?" "Calloway," he said. "I need to talk to you." Another pause, longer. Then the door buzzed open. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor. She met him in the hallway outside her door in a sweatshirt and jeans, hair loose, no shoes, holding a dish towel. She'd been in the middle of something domestic and ordinary, and he had arrived in the middle of it like a weather event. She looked at his face, and whatever she saw there changed her expression immediately. "What happened?" she said. "Can I come in?" She stepped back. He came in. It was a small apartment, bright and densely lived in. Books on every surface, a drafting table against the window covered in sketches, a small kitchen visible through the doorway, smelling of something warm and spiced. On the wall above the drafting table was a framed photograph. A man in work clothes at a construction site, laughing, caught mid-turn by whoever held the camera. Young, handsome, a face that, around the eyes and the line of the jaw, looked like a face Calloway now recognized. He stood in front of that photograph for a long moment. "That's my father," Zinnia said quietly from behind him. "Raymond." "I know," Calloway said. The silence that followed was the size of everything that needed to be said. He turned around. He looked at her, standing in the middle of her own living room, dish towel still in her hand, watching him with an expression that was completely still and completely alert, the way a person looks when they have been waiting for something for a very long time and can finally feel it arriving. "My mother told me," he said, "about the partnership, about what my father did in 1991, about the restructuring." He held her gaze. "I had no idea. I want you to know that first. I had no idea." Zinnia was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. He blinked. "You know." "My mother told me everything before she died," she said. "In August. She'd kept it for years. The original partnership documents, some of the correspondence. She wanted me to know where I came from." A pause. "Where my talent came from." She looked at the photograph on the wall. "She said my father never wanted to make me angry about it. He didn't want me to carry it as bitterness. He wanted me to carry it as proof that the instinct was real and that it was mine." Zinnia. Her name in his mouth felt different now, heavier, more true. "You knew what this company was when you were working in my building." "Yes." "You knew whose apartment you were cleaning." "Yes." Something moved through him, something complicated and humbling, the feeling of realizing that the ground you have been standing on is both more solid and more fraught than you understood. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you—" "Because I needed the work," she said simply, "and because what would I have said? Your father wronged mine 30 years ago. Write me a check. Take me to court. She shook her head. That wasn't what I wanted. And it wasn't what my father wanted either. She looked at him directly. I wanted to build something. That's all I have ever wanted. To build something real and have it stand. He crossed the room. He stopped 2 feet from her, close enough that he could see the steadiness it was costing her to hold herself this still, to deliver this much truth, this quietly, without any of it breaking loose. I'm going to make it right, he said. You don't owe me. I know I don't owe you, he said. That's not why. He looked at her. This woman who had cleaned his apartment for 16 months and carried a history he should have known, and a talent that should have had a room and a name on a door 20 years from now, not because of him, but in spite of everything that had tried to prevent it. I'm going to make it right, because it's right, and because your father found that site, and because you deserve to build on it. Zinnia Vale stood in her own living room and looked at him and said nothing for a long time. Then she set the dish towel down on the arm of the couch. You should eat something, she said. Whatever I'm making, there's enough. He looked at her. She looked back at him. And there it was again, that thing he had no name for yet, that lived between them in the careful space of every honest exchange they had ever had. Larger now, less deniable. Okay, he said. And he followed her into the kitchen. And the door between the living room and the rest of the evening closed softly behind them. The board meeting was the ugliest one in the history of Rice Properties, and Calloway had sat through some genuinely ugly ones. He presented the proposal on a Monday morning in December, 3 weeks after the night he'd eaten lamb stew at Zinnia Vale's kitchen table in Pilsen, and stayed until 11 o'clock talking, not about architecture, not about the company, not about the past. Just talking the way 2 people talk when they have run out of reasons to be careful with each other. He drove home through the quiet West Side streets with the windows down, despite the cold, because he needed the air, because the warmth of that apartment had done something to his internal temperature that he needed the November night to balance out. The proposal he put before the board was in 3 parts. First, a formal acknowledgement entered into company record that Raymond Vale had been a founding creative partner of what was now Rice Properties, and that his equity stake had been improperly restructured in 1991. Second, the establishment of the Raymond Vale Foundation, endowed at $10 million from Calloway's personal assets, not company funds, dedicated to supporting emerging designers from underrepresented communities in Chicago and Atlanta. Third, a restructuring of the Harrison Street project such that Zinnia Vale held a 15% equity stake in the development as its lead designer of record, pending her enrollment in and progress through IIT's professional architecture program. He presented all 3 parts quietly, without theatre, with the same tone he used for quarterly earnings reports. He had learned, a long time ago, that the most serious things should be said in the most ordinary voice. The board did not receive it quietly. Garrett Polk said that acknowledging the 1991 restructuring exposed the company to legal liability. Calloway said the statute of limitations had long expired and that legal liability was not the point. Sandra Osei said that a 15% equity position for an unlicensed designer set a dangerous precedent. Calloway said that a precedent of recognizing extraordinary talent regardless of credential was one he was prepared to defend publicly and at length. Doreen Mbeki, who had been quiet through all of it, watching him with the careful assessment of a woman who has observed many people make decisions and has learned to distinguish the ones made from fear from the ones made from something else, said only, "Calloway, are you certain about this?" "Completely," he said. Another silence. "Then let's vote," Doreen said. It passed 4-3, the narrowest margin of his professional life. He accepted it without visible relief and shook hands with all 7 of them. including the 3 who had voted against, and then he went back to his office and called Zinnia. It passed, he said. A pause. He had come to understand her pauses, the specific weight of each one, the way she used silence not as absence, but as presence, as a kind of listening that went in both directions. "All 3 parts," she said. "All 3 parts." She exhaled, long and slow, the breath of someone who has been holding something in their chest for years and has finally, cautiously, released it. "My father's name is in the company record," she said. Not a question, confirming something she needed to hear in her own voice. "Raymond Vale, founding creative partner," Calloway said. "As of this morning." She didn't say anything for a moment. He didn't fill it. He had learned not to fill her silences, that they were not empty. "Okay," she said finally, in a voice that was very small and very full. "Okay." She started at IIT in January. The evening track, Tuesdays and Thursdays 5 to 9, studio hours on Saturdays. She was the oldest person in her cohort by 4 years, and the most prepared. And within 6 weeks, she had become the person the studio professor used as an informal reference point when explaining what rigorous design thinking actually looked like in practice. She told Calloway about it on Thursday evenings. He had developed a habit. Neither of them had named it or formalized it. It had simply grown into existence, the way habits do when 2 people stop pretending they're not doing something. Of having dinner with her on Thursdays before her class. Sometimes at the small Ethiopian place on Blue Island Avenue. Sometimes at the diner on Kermack that was open until midnight and had the best pie in the near southwest side. Once memorably at the kitchen island of his penthouse, when neither of them had felt like going out, and she had made jollof rice from a recipe her mother had taught her, and he had sat on a stool and watched her cook, and felt, with a clarity that almost embarrassed him, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He had not said anything about what he felt. He was aware that the gap between their circumstances, even as it narrowed, even as the office on the 28th floor filled up with her drafting tools and her yellow legal pads, and the rolling sound of her voice explaining section cuts to the junior engineers, was still there, not in the way it had been, but present, real. He was her employer in a formal sense. He was the man whose company had wronged her family. He was aware of all of this, and he moved carefully, the way you move carefully around something that matters too much to rush. She was also aware of it. He could tell by the precise and deliberate way she maintained a certain distance, not coldness, never that, but a considered space, a room of her own inside every interaction, a territory she had defined and that he respected because respecting it was the only honest thing he could do. And then, one evening in late March, the last Thursday of the month, dinner at the Ethiopian place, the plum wine she always ordered and the injera he had come to love with a fervor that genuinely surprised him. She said, out of nowhere, in the middle of a conversation about the Harrison Street structural drawings, "I'm not angry anymore." He looked at her. "About your father?" "About any of it." She looked at her wine glass, turned it slowly in her fingers. "I was, for a long time. Even when I didn't let myself feel it directly, it was there, underneath, when I was cleaning that apartment. When I was in that supply closet, even when I handed you the model." She looked up at him. "I think I held on to it because it felt like the last thing I had from him, the injustice of it, like releasing it meant releasing him." He said nothing. He waited. "But I've been thinking about what he wanted," she said, "what my mother said he wanted for me, and I think—" She paused. "I think the building is enough. Watching it go up is going to be enough. Having his name in the record is enough." She looked at him steadily. "You did that. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said. "You know what I mean." "I know what you mean," he said. "And I'm telling you, yes, I did." not just for the right reason in the abstract. For you specifically, because it was yours, because you were owed it, and because—" He stopped. She looked at him. She was very still. "Because," she said. He looked at her across the small table in the small restaurant on Blue Island Avenue, with the winter finally going thin outside the window and the first suggestion of spring coming into the Chicago air. And he thought about the foyer, about the roses, about a door clicking closed in a life he had been about to commit to, and Zinnia Vale standing in the marble hallway like the only fixed point in a room that had just lost all its furniture. "Because you are the most extraordinary person I have ever met," he said. "And I have been trying to find the right moment to say that for 5 months, and I have decided that there is no right moment, and I'm just going to say it." Zinnia Vale looked at him for a long time. "Calloway," she said. "I know," he said. "I know the situation. I know everything that's complicated about it. I'm not asking for anything right now. I just needed you to know." She looked at the table, then the window, then back at him. "I've known for a while," she said quietly. "Which part?" "Both parts," she said. And she looked at him with that expression, the one he had never been able to name, the one she had been giving him since the foyer, since the supply closet, since the kitchen in Pilsen. He understood now what it was. It was the look of someone who has decided to trust something that has not yet been proven safe, who has chosen deliberately, with full knowledge of the risk, to step onto ground they cannot fully see yet. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held his. Neither of them said anything for a while. The restaurant moved around them. Other tables, other conversations, a television above the bar showing the Bulls losing in overtime. Ordinary life in every direction. "There's a groundbreaking ceremony in June," she said finally, "for Harrison Street." "I know," he said. "I'm giving a speech." "I know," she said. "So am I." He smiled. "I know." June arrived the way Chicago Junes always did. Suddenly, after a May that couldn't decide what it was, the city cracking open into warmth and green, and the specific relief of a place that has survived another winter and is not going to pretend that's nothing. The Harrison Street site was a cleared block on the near west side, fenced off, with heavy equipment parked along the perimeter and a small platform erected at the corner where the curved glass element would eventually meet the street. There were perhaps 200 people, community members, city officials, journalists, board members, architects from the engineering firm. Doreen Mbeki was there, in a coat the color of mustard, standing near the back with an expression of composed approval. Eleanor Rice was there too, which surprised Calloway. She had not been to a company event in 4 years. She stood near the platform and caught his eye once, across the crowd, and gave him a small, careful nod that contained inside it everything she had said and not said in the living room in Evanston. Zinnia was already on the platform when he arrived. She was wearing a long charcoal coat and had her hair pinned up, and she was talking to the site foreman with the easy technical authority of someone who has earned the right to stand in rooms where decisions get made. She looked like what she was, a designer at the beginning of a career that was going to be long and serious and genuinely important. He stood at the edge of the crowd for a moment and watched her. She laughed at something the foreman said, a real laugh, sudden and warm, and it moved through him the way it always did. He had the roses in his car. He'd bought them that morning, red and white, the same combination as the ones he'd carried through O'Hare in November, the ones that had sat on the entry table in the foyer through everything that followed and eventually been moved by Zinnia herself to a vase in the kitchen where they'd stayed until they dried. He didn't know if she'd noticed that. He suspected she had. He also had something in his jacket pocket, not a ring this time. Something else. The ceremony went the way groundbreaking ceremonies go. Speeches, a rendering displayed on a screen, A cluster of people in hard hats with gold-painted shovels, taking a photograph that would run in the Tribune real estate section on Sunday. Calloway spoke about the project, about the near West Side, about what he hoped the building would give back to a neighborhood that had given the city far more than it had ever received in return. He said Raymond Vale's name. He said it clearly, in the middle of the speech, not at the end as a footnote, in the middle as part of the architecture of the thing. Zinnia spoke after him. She spoke about buildings as acts of care, about how the best ones are not built for the people who fund them, but for the people who will live and work and shelter inside them, and how that distinction is the whole discipline. Everything else is just engineering. She spoke without notes. Her voice was steady and precise and warm. She spoke like someone who has been thinking about a single subject for 20 years and has finally been given the room. When it was over, when the gold shovels went back into the truck and the crowd began to break apart into smaller conversations and the caterers set up tables along the fence, Calloway found her at the edge of the platform. She saw the roses before he could say anything. He was holding them the same way he'd held them in the foyer, pressed against his chest, ridiculous, sincere. "Again," she said. "Different context," he said. She looked at the roses, then at him. The late afternoon light was doing something beautiful to the sight, turning the cleared earth warm and the sky above it a deep, saturated blue, and she stood in the middle of it with her charcoal coat and her pinned hair and her eyes that always told the truth. He held the roses out, and then, before she could take them, he reached into his jacket pocket with his other hand and placed on top of the craft paper, wrapping a single key on a plain steel ring. She looked at it. "What is that?" "Office key," he said. "New one. Your name on the door is different now." She looked up at him. He looked. "Different how?" He looked at her for a moment, this woman who had stopped him at the foot of a staircase and saved him from a door and shown him a sketchbook and trusted him with a model and sat with him in the dark of the worst Tuesday of his adult life and made jollof rice and held his hand across a small table and changed, without any dramatic announcement, every single thing he thought he understood about what he was building and why. "It says lead architect," he said. "Partner." She looked at the key. She took the roses with one hand and the key with the other, and she stood there holding both, and neither of them said anything for a moment. And then she looked up at him with that expression, the one he finally had a name for. It was the face of someone who has built something and watched it stand. "Calloway," she said. "Zinnia," he said. She stepped forward. She closed the space between them, the space that had been careful and considered and full of good reasons, and she put the hand with the key against his chest, over his heart, and looked up at him. "Ask me," she said. He looked at her. "I don't have a ring," he said. "I know," she said. "Ask me anyway." He did. She said yes. Behind them, on the cleared earth of the Harrison Street site, the future was already underway. The end.